All right, time for an expert scouting report on the 49ers sixth-round pick, Jarrett Kingston out of USC, started his career at Washington State and then went down to LA. I've been, we've talked to a lot of 24/7 guys over the last couple of days about the 49ers draft. USCfootball.com is a website I've used a ton over the years in a lot of my Pac-12 work. So it's great to have Connor Morrisette from USCfootball.com come on now. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about, but it's great to see you, Connor. Thanks for making time, man.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's talk about this pick, sixth-rounder. Obviously a high-profile guy being at SC in that sense. What was your reaction? Is this about where you thought he'd get drafted from a round standpoint?
I guess I could have seen anywhere from like 5th, 6th, 7th, or undrafted because the USC offensive line last season wasn't great, but Jarrett Kingston did well when he played, and he switched halfway through the season. He started at right guard. He's a more natural guard, but the line had so many issues that he had to be kicked out to tackle, and he did a nice job playing tackle too. But the line never really came together. It was a lot of transfer portal pieces and some other returning guys switching positions. I think Jarrett, though, was a bright spot for a lot of the season, and it wasn't his fault a lot of the time when some of the breakdowns occurred. I think he's a solid guy, projects as a guard, could maybe play some center, although he's never played center in his college career. In games, he's repped there in practice, but I think he'll either be a guard or a center, it looks like. And yeah, about what I expected.
6'4", 306. I mean, this is, and we see a lot of this year. And we're not going to see it much longer, but we're seeing a lot of it this year. A 6-year player, right? A 6th-year player, which from a draft standpoint can work against you based on age. So why did he play so much college football?
Well, I think he is the classic case of like a really solid college football player, but there's always that allure of maybe I go back to college for one more year and improve my stock. He wasn't clearly like a home run offensive lineman prospect. And when you have that free COVID year, and he also was a redshirt guy, so that allowed him to play 6 seasons. I think he had the choice to either enter the draft from Washington State or transfer, and he thought, let's go to a higher profile school. I think his final 2, it came down to Ohio State and USC. He ultimately chose USC, and now he gets drafted, so it might have been sort of a winding road to achieve his goal. But I think he's just the classic case of a guy who had the COVID year. Might as well use it. I'm not a home run pick. Let's go back to college and try to improve my stock.
What's interesting is the Washington State offensive lines that he was a part of were good lines, right? Like those were, as you know, covering that league, those were really good offensive lines. As you know, USC, it became a little more disheveled at times, people watching the Trojan offense. And a lot of people did last year, the year before, and then obviously just all the Caleb Williams tape. So would you call him a project? Is he a project? Is he potentially immediate depth? How would you classify Kingston?
It depends on where he's going to play. If the 49ers want him as a center, then definite project, but he certainly has a ton of experience at guard. He has a ton of experience all over the line. I think he's played everywhere but center in his career. He's not a tackle. He doesn't have the body type for that. So I think depth right away and throw him in at guard, kind of see what you got. And I think sometimes, as you know, later when you pick a guy, it's like, okay, we'll just throw him in, and sort of right away, it's like, okay, we either got something here or we don't. And I think on the offensive line, you can kind of tell pretty quickly. So if he does a nice job, I think he could make the team as a depth piece and eventually push to get into that starting group. And if he hasn't progressed as the team had hoped, I could see him having a brief career.
A lot was made rightfully in Lincoln's first year in 22 before Jarrett showed up about USC's inability or lack of willingness to run the ball in short yardage situations and goal line situations. I remember, I think it came to a head one time, Joel Klatt calling a game going, what are the, it was a goal line situation. He's like, what are these guys doing? You got to run. So they did make more of an effort, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, last year. They had some pretty good backs like Marshawn Lloyd. But how does Kingston fit in to their effort to run the ball more last year? And where's his strength, run blocking versus pass protection?
Yeah, I think he held up better in pass protection a lot of the time. That I think when he made the move out to right tackle, we sort of saw that. And I just think last season the the offensive line, it never, like I said earlier, it never really clicked for USC. So it's kind of hard to evaluate Kingston overall when he was part of a line that really struggled. They ran the ball a lot more with Caleb Williams in goal to go situations last season, so he definitely excelled at getting that push. And Caleb had, I forget, like 9 or 10 rushing touchdowns, and a lot of them were really in short yardage situations, and the line did a good job in those instances. But I think in pass protection, Kingston, he wasn't the guy. He wasn't a turnstile. USC had a few of those on the roster last season, so he wasn't that. And I just describe him as solid. There were very few times where you're watching the line, it's like, oh, okay, that was a mistake by Jarrett Kingston. He was a really solid guy, really well-rounded. A few of the other pieces for USC weren't as solid as the year went on, but I felt like he was just kind of solid overall. The pass blocking stands out more than the run blocking a little bit, but I think he'll develop there and get better with it.
Was he a guy that you guys talked to as the media much? What's he like?
A little bit. Really nice guy. I'd describe him as kind of like a chill, outdoorsy Northern California guy. I know he loves to be outside, and he'd always have a smile on his face. So really nice person. I listened to his interview with the 49ers over Zoom that he did when he was picked, and that sort of sums him up. Just there were some laughs. He's a nice kid. I believe he's married, and he's a good guy. He was fun getting to know him in the 1 year at USC.
You made me think too about Caleb running the ball. The Caleb run I always bring up to people. Was it a 2-point play at the end of the Arizona game where they basically played one-on-one with Caleb? For people that didn't see it, I was trying to remember. Did they have a center and 2 guards? Do you remember that formation?
It was a wonky formation. I think they just had the center
and him,
and everyone else was on the other side of the field. And the receivers were, I think, closer to the offensive line than the linemen were. And I think that was a breakdown, the Caleb running. I don't think he was supposed to run it. And yeah.
I loved that play. I was like the most one-on-one play I'd ever seen in football.
Yeah, he had a whole lot of those where he would just run and do something that you didn't think maybe he could do. Like earlier in the Arizona game, he rushed for a touchdown and he ran over a defensive lineman who probably should have tackled him. So that strength was crazy. But yeah, that play, if people I don't know what we're talking about it, watch those Arizona highlights. It was a bizarre formation, but it ended up working out.
I got to ask you, somebody asked me, which I can get to this later, about Harbaugh's first draft, but we spent a lot of time covering the Niners talking about Brendan Rice. He eventually does get drafted by the Chargers, but in the 7th round, which to me was later than I expected. What did you think of that? Was that surprising? Did his draft process kind of lead you to believe that maybe he would not get drafted high?
It was surprising. I don't think in the pre-draft process he necessarily had like a awesome time going through that. I think that sort of was held against him. I remember at the Senior Bowl, a lot of stuff I read, he wasn't separating the way people wanted to see him separate. And he's one of those guys. He's a contested catch guy. He's fast, but he kind of, like basketball, he'll box you out a little bit. And I think maybe there are some questions to, does that translate at the NFL level? And it can, of course, but I think as we saw with the receivers, he went so late, you'd rather take a gamble on a guy who maybe has better traits and projects to maybe be a better player than a guy who doesn't get open that well. But I mean, I could certainly see him having a really solid career. He led USC in touchdown receptions last season. He was described by the coaching staff as one of the toughest players on the team. He didn't miss a lot of time. So a little bit of a mystery. I wonder, and I have no idea on this, if his father sort of, being Jerry Rice, I don't know why that would work against him, but maybe that had something to do with it. I'm really not sure, because I was surprised by that too. I was watching the draft on ESPN, and he was like number 2 for Mel Kiper's best available for like 3 hours, and he just didn't go. So, yeah, I felt bad for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good spot, hopefully, for him. And, maybe in the end, and you get to stay in LA and go play with Herbert and Harbaugh. And I could see why Jim would like him. I think Juwan Jennings, who the Niners drafted in the 7th round out of Tennessee a few years ago, basically had a redshirt year. He's become a really productive player. And to me, there's some similarity. Like it's not about separation, but Juwan Jennings is like every 3rd and 8. That's the guy they throw the ball to, it feels like. And watching Brendan, like, I always just felt like there are some guys in college that you put them in the NFL and they're just the same guy. Like they're a role player in college. And you see a lot in basketball, I think. Role player in college just remain. Jaime Jaquez would be an example, I think, of this. He's more than a role player, but that because of their physicality, they can belong in the NFL. And that's how I kind of feel about Brendan, is like the way it looked in college is, I think, the way he won't be separating any more or any less because he didn't rely on that. But he always seemed to be able to ad-lib pretty well with Caleb. Like I think he played kind of when the play broke down. Would you agree? Was that a strength of his game? His feel?
Yeah, certainly. Against Arizona State, he did a great job in that department. Some plays would break down and they had a connection. I'd say Taj Washington was the same, who's headed to the Dolphins. He was more of a slot guy. Brendan Rice was more of a outside guy. Those two players probably had the best rapport with Caleb Williams last season, and it's cool to see both of them get drafted. But yeah, I'd agree. And Brendan Rice out of high school, he wasn't like a home run, can't miss prospect. I believe he was like a 3-star, and he started at Colorado, and he didn't really produce like crazy there. And then he had a good season at USC, a great game in the bowl game against Tulane, even though everyone remembers that game for USC's terrible defense. And Rice, went off in that game. And then people were like, okay, maybe can he be this number one alpha receiver? And I don't think he was quite that last year for USC, but he was really solid, led him in touchdowns, like I said. And I'm excited to see what he can do, because I think if he has an opportunity with the Chargers and they give him a chance, I think he could take it, and he could be one of those 7th-round guys who does make an impact.
I liked the Marshawn Lloyd pick to the Packers at 88. I thought that guy was a stud.
Yeah.
10 years ago, he's a much higher draft pick, I think.
Me too. The only thing with him, it's the injuries. He missed some time at South Carolina before he transferred to USC. But, I mean, he averaged 7 yards per carry, and he had 3 fumbles. So those were the two things, the injuries, the fumbles. I guess he wasn't a great pass blocker either, but I think with his body that he'll be coached up to do a better job. He's just a beast of a running back. You don't want to throw out the Marshawn Lloyd or Marshawn Lynch comparison when talking about Marshawn Lloyd, but very similar physical guys. Yeah. Excuse me. And I think he's going to excel in the NFL. I don't know how long he can play the way he plays, because it's so physical, it's so violent. But for like 3 or 4 years, I think he's going to be a really good back in the league. He's just a guy you give him the ball to and let him go.
He got benched in a game, I remember, after a fumble, and their running game came to a screeching halt, as I recall. You remember better than me, but it was.
He did have some costly fumbles, and like Caleb Williams fumbled the ball a lot too. He would get a lot of those back. I believe when Marshawn Lloyd fumbled, I know for sure USC didn't get 2 of them, and maybe it was all 3. So 3 fumbles doesn't sound like a ton, but they kind of came at inopportune times. And so that's something he needs to work on for sure.
Before I let you go, Trojans going to be any good this year? How's USC looking? They had their spring game last week.
The spring game was very vanilla. Let's say that we didn't get to see a lot. I think Lincoln Riley is really nervous about this LSU game, and he doesn't want to put too much on tape. So I'm excited for that one. That'll be a great game. I always like that Sunday first weekend of college football game. It was usually LSU, Florida State the last couple of years. Now it's going to be USC this season. So yeah, overall, I think they'll be good. Will they be great? I don't necessarily think so. They're really, really thin on the interior of the defensive line right now. They had a guy who transferred in January, and then he went to Auburn. He was here for like 3 months, who they were really relying on. And they're working really hard behind the scenes to add more depth there. So to me, I think it kind of comes down to the line of scrimmage on both sides. If the offensive line is solid, better than last year, because it was not very good last year, and the defensive line is better than last year. It produced in the games against bad teams, but when the competition got a lot tougher, they did not produce at the level you'd expect from a USC team. So I think with Lincoln Riley and some of the coaching additions that they've made, you're going to get good quarterback play. You're going to get good receiver play. The offense will score points. Defensively, I like what Danton Lynn's doing a lot. I think the linebackers will improve. The secondary is probably the strength of the defense. My biggest question marks are on the line of scrimmage. If it's better than I expect, they could be better than I expect. But if it's what I expect, I could see him winning 8 games again.
That game's at Allegiant Stadium. Danton Lynn, by the way, was a guy. I actually thought the Niners should at least have considered. I'm not saying they should have hired him, but to me, he kind of, when the Niners had to replace Steve Wilkes, I don't know. Did he end up getting any NFL interviews before he took the SC job? Do you know?
We asked him. He didn't really talk about it. I think the timing of it, with him being hired the first day of December, that's before a lot of that NFL stuff would open up. And so, like, I think he kind of took the USC job. And if he did get some interest later, I don't think he was in a position to be like, well, sorry, USC, I'm going to go to the NFL. This is a better opportunity. And you know, that might be like, I don't know if 100% he was offered a defensive coordinator position, because I guess maybe he'd be crazy not to take it. I just feel like he was locked in with USC, and that if people put out any feelers, his camp, I think, reported back like, I don't think it's the right time for him.
Yeah, big year. I mean, he could really. I mean, his stock is up. You bring this USC defense just to respectability, and it's pretty. It's easy. He becomes a star coaching candidate.
Yeah, I'm just curious. The defensive line for UCLA, I mean, they had the first defensive player drafted in Liatu Latu.
Yeah.
USC does not have anyone like that on their defensive line right now. So the schedule for UCLA was really easy last season, and their defensive line, he walked into a great situation, and he did an exceptional job turning them around. I don't want to take any credit away from him, but it's a very different set of circumstances here at USC, and the defensive line, I think, is a major, major question mark. The schedule is tougher. I think he's going to have his work cut out for him, and I'm so excited to see how it all progresses and what he does.
USCfootball.com, great coverage there of not just the Trojans, but recent draft picks, and a great perspective on Jarrett Kingston, among others. Connor, thanks for making time on a Sunday, man. Thank you. It's good to see you. My
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Connor Morrisette, appreciate that. And off he goes there. We'll have I got a bunch of stuff to do today and this week, so we'll keep that going. And you know, I mean, I think the takeaway on Kingston is, yeah, maybe the Niners have a lot of depth at offensive line. So I don't know, there's not any guarantee that Kingston makes the team, but clearly a guard. And as he said, if you want to talk about him being a center, because physically he might look like one, that's fine. But as Connor said, he played no center. He didn't play any center. So, all right, that's that for this. And, you know, more coming, but just banging out some insights, some expert insights on a Sunday. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.